don't be startled. This layout seems to be the in thing these days with car makers, especially if you equate the face of a car with the face of a human being, where the grille is the nose, the air dams are the mouth, and the headlamps are the eyes. Citroën started this quirky trend of placing the eyes below the level of the nose a few years back, and then Hyundai picked up on that trend with the Kona and the Santa Fe. And their siblings at Kia are going to try something similar with the SP concept that was shown at the Auto Expo. And speaking of the Indian scheme of things, even Mahindra gave it a try with the Nuvo Sport. But I believe that the most handsome attempt from an Indian car maker at this layout is this, the Tata Harrier. The Tata Harrier began life as the H5X concept that was shown at the 2018 Auto Expo, and it carries forward all those bold lines and that muscular stance. The squared wheel arches have been rounded off though, and the sharp lighting elements of the concept make way for relatively more conventional units. The range-topping trims come with projector beam lamps, and you also have a fog lamp placed right underneath. The overall housing is quite large compared to what the concept showcased, and the treatment is a bit polarizing. But what certainly looks good though are the LED daytime running lights. They feel like they've come straight out of a sci-fi movie. They also integrate the turn blinkers, and they are a standard fit across the range. That said, a small matter of concern is that these headlights lie right in the zone where most people tend to pick up dings and dangs on their bumpers. Moving on, the Land Rover inspired grille is larger too, and more imposing than what the concept showcased. Even the floating roof effect is straight out of the Land Rover design book. The taillights look sophisticated with a three-dimensional design, and the tailgate isn't peppered with too many badges, which is a good thing. The Harrier also has small overhangs, and the rear sweeps up like a new-age Land Rover. You will frequently hear me using the words Land Rover when I'm talking about the Harrier, and that is because this car debuts the new Omega architecture for Tata, which essentially is a modified version of Land Rover's D8 architecture that also underpins the Discovery Sport. But you see, it's not only about borrowing the underpinnings. Borrowing the Land Rover architecture also means it defines the position of the A-pillar, the size of the cabin, the wheelbase choices. So merging those typical Land Rover proportions with the unique design theme that Tata has to offer is not an easy job. But you look at this car closely and you realize it's all turned out astonishingly well. Speaking of the wheelbase, it is exactly as much as the Discovery Sport, which also allows for a body that's larger than the XUV 500 and the Compass. In fact, the Harrier is the largest car in its class, and that has an immediate advantage inside the cabin, making it quite a spacious place to be in. Even with the driver's seat completely retracted, just look at the amount of knee room and leg space that I have. I could literally sit here with my legs crossed if I want to. Even the headroom is very generous. The visibility outside of the window is quite good too. The space here is really nice. It has a spacious feel to it despite the use of darker colors. I also like the angle of the backrest on the rear seat. I think it's going to be quite comfortable on long distance journeys. The under thigh support is good. The contouring of the seats is quite nice. You have a big flat section here, so placing 3 adults here is not going to be a problem at all. You also get B-pillar mounted AC vents. The AC in itself is quite powerful. You also have these cup holders here. You have this really nice double-decker panel here for your storage. So the overall space here at the back is quite nice. In fact, this is a 5-seater configuration, but Tata is also working on a 7-seater variant of the Harrier. It might be a slightly longer car. It might sit on a slightly longer wheelbase, but for this, I think they have made proper use of the wheelbase here. You have a lot of space here, and you also have a lot of space at the back. In fact, unlike the Hexa, storage spaces aren't a concern in the Harrier. There are plenty of spaces for knickknacks and 1-litre bottles, and there's a generously roomy 425-litre boot that can help fuel your road trip dreams. I quite like the treatment of the cabin. Everything is so nicely put together. You finally have soft touch materials on a Tata, and I think that's a big move. The fit and finish is really nice. The design looks clutter-free. This is certainly the best that we've seen from Tata so far. It's got a nice, pleasing and a warm vibe to it, despite the use of the blacks and the dark browns and the oak wood finish that you have here. Like I said, the fit and finish is better than most of the Tata cars that we've seen. It's definitely a step up. While most of the controls are easy to reach, the USB ports at the front and back aren't. I would have also liked the front seats to be slightly wider, as the thick bolstering can get uncomfortable for anyone with a broad frame. Visibility from the front seats is excellent, though the steering is a bit in your face even when retracted completely. I also like the instrumentation. It's got an analog speedometer with a big digital display on the side for the tachometer and the other relevant data. I wish to have slightly larger telltale lights that were easy to read than these tiny ones that are very easy to miss. But otherwise, I like the treatment. I like how crisp that screen is. I like how the menus are done. Everything looks really nice. The only change I would have liked is probably a more premium looking steering wheel compared to what we've seen in the other Tata cars. This is very similar to that. But otherwise, no complaints. I like the overall vibe of this cabin. The stick-out display is a massive 8.8-inch high-resolution touchscreen that is split into 3 zones, a central display area for the infotainment data, flanked by the infotainment control panels on either side. The display is crisp and the interface is intuitive and in line with the instrumentation, making it safer to read when driving. What also makes this a little more safer is the fact that this infotainment can cast certain data like navigation or telephony or audio info to the top section of the instrumentation. It's a cheap yet effective alternative to a head-up display. In fact, some cost-cutting measures are evident when you look at the car or the brochure closely. The premium feel of the car leaves you wanting for things like maybe a sunroof and wireless charging. The handbrake looks fancy but isn't the electronic type. The steering system too isn't electronic and is the old-school hydraulic type. The alloys aren't machine finished and the suspension is a twist blade type instead of the multi-link setup that the Discovery Sport employs. All this helps keep the costs low. Which is fine by me as long as it achieves the desired level of reliability and functionality without compromising on the ownership experience. The suspension certainly does that. It has a supple ride whether you're driving alone or driving with a full house, and I did subject it to some really sharp bumps and it remained quite impressive. I was quite impressed with the ride quality of the Hexa as well, and if you were too, wait till you drive the Harrier. The suspension tuning comes from the dynamics experts at Lotus, and it shows. There is a bit of vertical movement when traveling with a light load, but with 4 people in the car, it handles quite well and never feels unnerving or skittish. Complementing that are the tyres, and the 235 section size is standard across the range. The steering is quite well tuned too. It does have that dead at center feel, but beyond that there's good feedback. It also weighs off well at highway speeds. Lane changes at highway speeds aren't unnerving either. And when you're driving in the city, it's conveniently light. It is complemented by an equally light clutch, which is a big deal, especially if you compare it to the painfully heavy clutch pedal operation in the Jeep Compass. The Compass reference comes from the fact that the Cryotech engine that powers the Harrier is the same Fiat Source 2-litre multi-jet turbocharged 4-cylinder diesel engine that also powers the Compass. Tata, however, has their own clutch actuator on the gearbox, and that is the reason why the clutch action is much lighter. The pedal travel is still as long as it is in the Compass. It's a typical Fiat thing, but the clutch action, the pedal of the clutch action is much lighter. It also gives it the self-adjusting feature that Tata keeps touting about on their brochures. The Cryotech engine puts out about 140 PS of power, which is a 35 PS deficit over the Compass. It has an identical 350 Nm of torque though. Even the curb weight is in the same pin code as the Compass. Whether you're driving on the highway, in the city or around the twisties, the Harrier certainly doesn't feel as punchy as the Jeep Compass. But that said, it doesn't feel underpowered or laggy in any of these scenarios. The power delivery is quite linear, and for now you will only get this car with a 6-speed manual gearbox, just the way the Compass does. But Tata also says that an automatic is being considered, and unlike the Compass, they aren't really limited by the option of only having a dual clutch transmission, which will turn out to be quite expensive. So unlike Jeep, they aren't really worried about conceiving and bringing out a diesel automatic with the Harrier. Apart from their own tuning, Tata has also added more of their own flavor to this drivetrain by way of a Hexa-like terrain response system and multiple driving modes. There are 3 engine maps to choose from. There is City, which you will do most of your driving in. There is the Eco mode, which dulls down the throttle response significantly. In fact, the engine starts feeling a little strained with the Eco mode. So if you're out on the highway, that's a mode that I wouldn't really recommend. And then you have the Sport mode, which makes a noticeable change to the performance and the character of the engine. It becomes a lot more free revving, and that's the one that you would want to choose if you're out on the highway or in the twisties. You also have the terrain response system, which essentially uses functions of the traction control and the ABS to fine-tune the performance of the grip, whether you're driving on the wet surface or rough road or even dry surface for that matter. So depending on the preset that you've chosen, it will fine-tune all these things to give you maximum amount of grip. We tried the rough road mode and the braking response was surprisingly good on travel for these road tires when compared to the city mode. The brakes themselves are a bit spongy and need getting used to, but do their job as intended despite having drum brakes on the rear wheels. The Harrier also has a hill descent control should you need it. It's natural for anyone to expect the Harrier to have much better off-roading capabilities right out of the box, considering the fact that it is based on Land Rover underpinnings. Unfortunately, however, all that you get right now is a front-wheel drive configuration, though Tata is quick to point out that the platform is ready. It does accommodate an AWD, an all-wheel drive system. So should the need arise, should they see enough demand for an AWD variant, they will always be able to bring out a Harrier AWD. However, I personally believe that they should have done it already. They should have got it with the Harrier at launch itself, have it on the portfolio, since most of the competition already has it. Unsurprisingly, the Harrier, with all its power and its size and its overall poise, it's a very good highway cruiser as well. The only little fly in the ointment is the noise insulation. Tata has done a great job insulating the road and the tire and the suspension noises. However, the drivetrain noises are still slightly on the higher side. The fact that the multi-jet engine is inherently quite noisy doesn't help the fact either. And then you have these really large outside rear view mirrors or the wing mirrors, which also make sure that there is a lot of wind noise creeping into the cabin at speeds as low as 80 kilometers an hour. So this is the only fly in the ointment for me. If Tata were to somehow give you better wind insulation, wind noise insulation, engine noise insulation, I think it would be a very silent cabin that would go with the premium poise of the Harrier. In fact, these are very small niggles that in the larger scheme of things don't really dampen the experience that the Harrier has to offer. The Harrier might not have the canvas to stir up a cult following like the Safari did, but it's certainly just as important a step as the Safari in Tata's passenger car history. To that effect, the Harrier might also see more drivetrain options in the years to come, including electrified variants, which would be a big step forward. While cars like the Tiago showcase the direction that Tata was headed in, the Harrier cements the fact that Tata has become a force to reckon with.